All right, folks. One big, beautiful bill deficit Trumpian primer. How's that? A deficit Trumpian primer. It actually should say Trumpian deficit primer, okay? There's a lot of numbers flying around. And we're going to have Steve Miller on. He's going to give us some additional thoughts on these numbers. But let me just review the One Big Beautiful Bill scorecard, because I know these numbers are flying around. And I'm going to try to do, the last couple of days, I'm going to try to do this as easily as possible so people can follow. Let us start with this table, okay? Here comes the table. It's a super-duper table. The current policy 2017 tax cut cost, all right, so there's the table, should be zero, okay? Zero, all right? Actually, the CBO underreported it over the past 7 years by $2.3 trillion. Slow down there on the prompter. You're going too fast because I want folks to be able to see this, okay? Just take a look at the chart, all right? The current cost of the 2017 tax cuts should be zero. Why should they be zero? Because they actually produced more revenues, $2.3 trillion more revenues than CBO estimated over the past 7 years. So current policy shouldn't be scored. The deficit impact should be neutral. Now, I believe there will be a growth dividend, which may be debatable, but if I plug in 3% growth instead of the CBO's lowball 1.8%, then I actually get a $4 trillion worth of additional revenues for purposes of deficit reduction, okay? Just to make that nice and simple, all right? I'm plugging in 3% growth, not the CBO's lowball 1.8%. I'll return to the growth dividend theme in a few moments. Now, then, gets a little easier. I plug in a $1.7 trillion mandatory savings, which even the CBO agrees upon. And then, actually, a new CBO report, I plug in tariff revenues of $2.8 trillion over the next 10 years. That's, by the way, assuming a 10% universal baseline tariff. Now, unfortunately, much as I like the CBO estimate and their acknowledgement of what's happening already in the first half of this year, unfortunately, the CBO won't count it for the One Big Beautiful Bill because Congress didn't appropriate it. But it's there. And it will slash the deficit, and we will sell a lot fewer bonds. So I can come up with an $8.5 trillion deficit reduction over the 10-year planning period. That's a darn sight better than CBO's $2.4 trillion deficit increase, all right? 8.5%, $8.5 trillion reduction in the deficit. CBO's is a $2.5 trillion increase. Now, look. You can play with these numbers interactively. If you lower the growth dividend, let's say to 2.6%, you'd probably lose up to $2 trillion in revenues and deficit reduction. Or if you want to use CBO's dreary 1.8% growth, you'd probably lose the whole $4 trillion in additional revenues and deficit reduction. You'd still come out ahead on the deficit reduction scorecard, but just not as much. But importantly, the GOP will prevent a $4 trillion tax hike, which would be catastrophic for the economy. And the GOP will implement the biggest welfare reform package, that is to say, workfare, not welfare, in at least 30 years, going back to the Clinton-Gingrich days in the middle 1990s. So let's just put that table back up on the full screen, please. Let's roll back, put the table back up so people can see it. There you go. Just take a look at it. I've tried to explain it. And the total deficit reduction could be as much as $8.5 trillion. If you disagree with some of my assumptions, I got it. But the one thing is that I can just tell you, extending the tax bill is not going to cost anything. And you're going to get a growth dividend. And the mandatory savings are agreed to by CBO, and the tariff revenues are a pleasant surprise, and that's going to be an additional way of financing the government in the future.